"Move! You're holding up the entire line." The words hit with a jolt. Sharp, loud, and ugly. They sliced through the droning announcements and echoed off the terminal's plastic walls. Earl Whitmore flinched. He stood near the front of the queue, 84 years old, spine slightly stooped, hands curled with age but steady. He wore a neatly pressed jacket, dark navy wool, with the faint shimmer of old ribbons pinned across his chest. A small American flag rested in the lapel. His right hand trembled as it held his boarding pass, the paper soft from being folded and refolded that morning. Behind him, a man in a sleek gray suit rolled his eyes with theatrical impatience. "I said move! Now!" The businessman's voice boomed louder this time, drawing glances. His face was flushed, jaw tight, brows drawn down in irritation. One hand clutched the handle of a rolling briefcase, the other jabbed toward Earl's back, barely missing the old man's shoulder. Earl turned slightly, startled, his lips parted, dry, unsure, as if he meant to apologize. But no words came, just the faint sound of breath, ragged and low. A child held his father's hand, eyes wide. A teenager lowered her phone, staring with knitted brows. Further back, a woman placed her coffee on the floor without thinking, gaze locked on the scene unfolding before her. "Sir," a TSA agent said, approaching with hesitant steps, "if you could just let the others through." "I'm trying," Earl whispered, voice hoarse. "Just give me a moment." But the businessman stepped forward again. "You people and your costumes," he muttered, shaking his head. "Just looking for attention. It's a plane, not a parade." Earl didn't move, didn't raise his voice, just closed his mouth and lowered his gaze. His shoulders drew inward, the way a man does when trying to disappear without walking away. Near gate B12, a tall figure in a gray hoodie shifted his weight. He had been leaning against the wall, arms crossed, silent. His jaw clenched, and one hand adjusted his sleeve, just enough to expose the ink curling up his forearm. A golden eagle clutching a trident. He stepped away from the wall, slowly, deliberately. His boots tapped softly against the tile, not rushing, not reacting, but watching. And then, a sound, subtle but clear, as a nearby gate attendant picked up the intercom mic and froze with it inches from her lips. The air stilled, just for a beat, and in that moment, everyone seemed to be waiting for something to break. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. Earlier that morning, the kettle hissed softly on the stovetop, steam curling like ghostly ribbons toward the ceiling. In the dim amber light of the kitchen, Earl Whitmore stood steady beside the counter, his movements unhurried, precise. The house was silent save for the clock ticking faintly on the wall and the kettle's growing urgency. He reached over with a spotted hand, turned the burner knob with a soft click, and set the kettle aside. His cane leaned against a chair, always nearby, but never the first thing he reached for. It was barely 6. Outside, morning fog still hugged the street, and the first birds hadn't begun to call. Earl's home was modest. One story, pale brick, a roof he patched himself. But every surface bore the echoes of decades. A faded photo frame near the door held 2 smiling faces in uniform. He passed it like ritual. At the edge of his dresser, laid out like an altar, were the pieces of the day: navy blue jacket, crisp white shirt, polished service cap, ribbons, and an envelope marked in careful pen. Donald dedication ceremony. He stood in front of it all and inhaled. Not to sigh, just to feel it. Earl reached for his razor. Not electric, a straight edge with a worn handle that had belonged to his father. He dragged it slowly down the slope of his jaw, steadying himself against the porcelain sink with his other hand. No rush, no sloppiness. He shaved like men who learn to shave intense by moonlight. After, he buttoned his shirt and slipped into the jacket. The fabric felt heavier these days, not because of the wool, but the weight of memory. He pinned his bronze star just below his nameplate. Last, the ribbons. Combat Infantryman Badge, Korean Service Medal, United Nations Ribbon, each one aligned with reverent care. He paused and looked in the mirror. 84 years, a body slower than he remembered, but the eyes were the same. He touched the rim of his cap and gave himself a faint nod. In the living room, a letter sat folded on the table. Earl picked it up, its corners soft from handling. It was from James Donnell, the grandson of Bobby, his old friend from the war. The boy had written in tight cursive, "Grandpa always said you saved his life. We're honoring him at the State Museum this weekend. I'd be honored if you would attend." Earl read the line again, mouthing the words silently. He placed the letter back on the table and checked his watch. Time to go. Outside, the sun had not yet climbed fully. The air smelled of dew and aging grass. He stepped carefully down the path, tapping the cane just slightly ahead of each footfall. The hedges were overgrown, but Earl still pruned them himself once a month. His neighbor's teenage son stood nearby with earbuds in, watching Earl shuffle toward the driveway in full uniform. "Try hard," the boy muttered, not quite under his breath. Earl didn't react. He just reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his keys, and unlocked the gate with a slow turn. The boy looked away. A few blocks down, at the corner cafe, Earl entered for his usual black coffee, 1 sugar, senior cup. The girl at the register barely glanced up. "Still valid for your age?" she said, tapping buttons on the screen without waiting for an answer. He smiled faintly. "Always is." She slid the cup toward him, already turning to the next order. He moved to the side, hand shaking a little as he held the lid in place. An older man nearby nodded to him. Earl nodded back. No words exchanged. Back in the car, not his, but a rideshare, the driver didn't speak at first. Then, as Earl climbed in slowly, one leg at a time, the man exhaled sharply. "Take your time, sir," he said. Not kindly, not sarcastically, just tired. The seatbelt clicked. Earl stared out the window as houses blurred past. The driver asked finally, "You a vet or something?" Earl nodded once. "Yes, Korean War." The man said nothing else. As the terminal came into view, Earl adjusted his cap again. It had once been midnight blue, now faded to storm gray. The patch above the bill read, "United States Army, Infantry, a badge of honor, a badge of memory." As the car slowed, Earl gathered his things with care, envelope, boarding pass, folded program, and stepped out into the crush of airport morning. Carts rolled past. Voices rose and fell. Lights flickered overhead. He walked slowly to the terminal doors. Inside, lines twisted like serpents toward blinking monitors. Children cried. Announcements barked unintelligible syllables. And through it all, Earl kept walking. Until the line at gate B14. Until the moment the world reminded him again that it had changed. That perhaps in the minds of many, it had moved on without him. That his jacket and his medals and his cane were in the way. And then came the voice. "Move! You're holding up the entire line." The air conditioning hummed above, indifferent to the tension growing below. Conversations dimmed around gate B14, as if the terminal itself had leaned in. Earl remained at the front of the line, boarding pass now slightly crumpled in his hand. His fingers, stiff from age and colder than the room allowed, struggled to steady the paper. Behind him, Blake Marston's breathing sharpened. "This is ridiculous," Blake muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Do I need to call someone, or are we going to move?" He glanced around, fishing for support. Most looked away. A few shifted awkwardly. A woman in yoga pants bit her lip, glancing between the men. No one said a word. Blake's voice snapped again. "TSA! This is a liability standing in the middle of a fire lane." A nearby agent, young and unsure, approached. His vest was too large, his name tag dangling. He cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to Earl, "we might need you to step to the side until the crowd clears." Earl looked up, his brows furrowed faintly, confusion softening into something deeper. Weariness. I'm on the veterans boarding list," he said, quiet as breath. But the agent already turned to Blake, nodding with shallow gratitude for the help. Earl took a slow step back. He didn't argue, didn't correct. His body leaned on the cane now more than ever. His mouth moved again, but nothing emerged. Just silence. A young man, barely out of high school by the look of him, wearing a college hoodie and backpack, stepped forward. "I think he served," he said, voice cautious, eyes on the agent. "You can see the uniform." The agent's jaw moved, but before words came, Blake barked, "Enough! You people think wearing a few buttons makes you heroes? Save it for Veterans Day!" It hit the terminal like glass shattering on tile. A woman near the back gasped. A man further down hissed a quiet curse under his breath. A child began to cry softly, not from fear, but from sensing something was deeply wrong. Earl flinched, as if struck. He looked away, down at his shoes, down at the space between his feet and the line that now seemed 10 miles wide. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. Across the terminal, Logan Travers moved. He'd waited, observed, let the moments build, hoping someone else would do the right thing. But now, after that, he could not let it stand. His boots tapped once, twice, not rushed, but direct, with purpose. His face was unreadable, but his eyes locked on Blake as if he could measure the weight of the man's arrogance by glance alone. And still, Logan said nothing. The tattoo on his forearm caught the light. A Navy SEAL trident, dark, inked deeply, worn like a scar. The gate attendant held the mic, frozen mid-air, mouth slightly open. She hadn't blinked in 10 seconds. Near the edge of the scene, the boy in the hoodie didn't sit down. He watched. A mother held her daughter closer. A traveler in line removed his earbuds. No one looked at their phones now. This wasn't a viral moment, not yet. It was a fracture in the day, quiet but deep, and the air felt brittle, as if anything louder than a whisper might split it open. Then Logan took a final step. Close now, within breath of both men, still silent, still steady, the moment before the tide shifts. The wind was a living thing that night, sharp and bitter, tearing through the Korean hills like a blade searching for flesh. Snow didn't fall. It drifted sideways, slicing through the frozen air, catching in the folds of uniforms and the corners of foxholes. Private First Class Earl Whitmore lay flat against the cold earth, his cheek pressed to the barrel of his rifle, the metal so cold it burned. The mountains around them were dark except for the flickers of distant shell bursts, yellow-orange tongues of fire licking the night sky in irregular rhythm. The world had narrowed to breath, to cold, to waiting. Beside him, Bobby Donnell shifted with a grunt, pulling his jacket higher. "I can't feel my hands," he muttered. "You'll feel them when the mortars start again," Earl answered, voice low but even. They were part of a forward observation unit, pinned outside an abandoned village west of the Imjin River. Their radio was barely functional. The medics were a half-mile back, and somewhere in the valley, another patrol had fallen under fire, one of them wounded and calling for help across the radio's cracked frequency. Bobby's eyes were wide despite the dark. "We gotta get him." Earl didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted to the snow-covered slope where the last flare had fallen. Nothing moved, but he could feel the watching, the waiting. A whisper in his gut told him the brass would wait until morning. Safer, cleaner, strategic. But Earl stood. "You're not serious," Bobby whispered, grabbing at his arm. "You go out there, you're dead." "Maybe," Earl said. He adjusted his helmet, tightened the strap, and crouched low. "Stay low. Keep the signal open. I'll bring him back." Then he ran. The snow exploded beneath his boots, muffling sound, swallowing breath. Machine gun fire cracked like frozen branches above his head. He dove behind a rock outcropping, rolled, and kept moving. In the distance, a voice, weak, barely audible, cried out. "Help!" Earl found the wounded Marine half buried beneath a collapsed fence, blood mixing with snow. A round had caught him in the gut. Eyes wide, teeth clenched, but still alive. Earl slung his rifle across his back and hoisted the man over his shoulder. Every step back felt like lifting a mountain. Each breath was fire and ice. Halfway up the slope, a shout, then a burst of fire. Bobby was running toward them, silhouetted against a distant flare, rifle slung low, arms out. "You're insane!" he shouted over the chaos, grabbing the wounded man's other arm. "You're actually dragging a full-grown Marine uphill in a snowstorm." "You came," Earl grunted. "I couldn't let you die, stupid." Together, they pulled the Marine into a ditch and dragged him down the line toward the aid tent. The moment they crossed the wire, medics descended like angels in green, pulling the man from their arms. One clapped Earl's shoulder. Another shouted for plasma. Earl collapsed onto a cot, chest heaving, throat raw from the cold. Bobby knelt beside him. "Don't you ever do that again without me?" Earl smiled, the first in days. "You ran toward bullets to stop me. Seems like you're worse." In the faint glow of a kerosene lantern, Bobby leaned close. His voice was quieter now, the kind of voice men only used in the presence of death, or love, or both. "If anything ever happens to me, you promise me something." Earl nodded slowly. "Anything. You tell them I mattered. You tell my family, my boy. You make them remember." Earl didn't answer right away. Then he took Bobby's hand, dirty, frozen, still shaking, and said the only word that mattered, "Promise." Back in the airport terminal, Earl's hand brushed the edge of his boarding pass again. He wasn't in Korea anymore, but the snow still lived in his bones. The boy beside him, the Marine they had saved, the night they had bled, it all still breathed beneath his skin. And in the silence of the moment, that memory stood taller than the man yelling behind him. The silence following the insult clung to the terminal like fog, heavy, motionless, waiting. Conversations that once buzzed from all corners now dwindled to murmurs behind raised hands. Somewhere, a soda can hissed open with a fizz that sounded absurdly loud. Nearby, a baby whimpered softly before being hushed by a mother whose eyes had locked on the center of the scene. Earl Whitmore stood small in the center of that stillness. His shoulders were slightly hunched from years of wear, but his uniform, the olive wool jacket of the Korean War era, was pressed crisp, the metals aligned with military precision. His boarding pass quivered faintly in his trembling right hand, the text smudged slightly from a thumb pressed too long against the paper. His cane wavered in his left, the rubber tip squeaking gently against the tile as he tried to step forward. But Blake Marston had planted himself directly behind the older man, immovable, loud, full of self-importance and tension. He folded his arms with the sort of tight, aggressive posture only found in men who believe they've been wronged by the inconvenience of other people's existence. "I said move!" he barked again, emphasizing the word like a blow. "You're holding up the entire line! What is this? A parade!" A gate agent lifted her eyes, lips parted, caught between policy and discomfort. She rose an inch from her stool, then sank back again. A young man further in line pulled his hoodie tighter around his face, unsure. A child's voice piped up from the stroller beside his mother. "Why is he yelling at the grandpa?" His mother shushed him gently, eyes wide and darting. And then, footsteps, measured, heavy, purposeful. The rhythm of boots that didn't hurry, didn't scuff, didn't hesitate. They didn't stomp. They landed, one by one. The sound drew eyes before it drew recognition. From the side of the terminal, Logan Trevors stepped forward. His posture was upright but not stiff, the natural command of someone who had walked into chaos more than once and never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. His hoodie remained unzipped halfway, the dim airport lights glinting just enough to illuminate the faint outline of the gold and silver Navy SEAL trident tattoo above his wrist. The hem of a United States Navy Foundation badge peeked slightly from under his collar, a flash of blue on black cord. He said nothing as he stepped closer. Blake Marston saw him and scoffed, throwing up his hands in exaggerated disbelief. "Oh, what now? You too?" he muttered. You people just come crawling out of the woodwork the second someone's feelings get hurt. Logan didn't reply. Instead, he stepped beside Earl, offering not an arm but presence, the way a wall offers presence. Not to speak for, not to guide, just to stand with. Earl turned his head slightly, lips parting, confusion in his eyes. The uniform didn't register at first, not fully, but the trident did. Earl blinked once, then again, and the corner of his mouth pulled upward in something that wasn't quite a smile, more like recognition. Blake rolled his eyes and took a step forward. You don't even know this guy. He's blocking the… Enough! The word didn't rise. It didn't need to. Logan said it like a weight being placed gently but firmly onto a trembling table. One word, and the terminal changed. An airline worker stood up completely now, pulling off her headset. The security guard who had earlier waved at Blake now hesitated at the edge of the line, his stance slackening. Even the baby in the stroller grew quiet, eyes wide. Logan turned then, just slightly. Not to Blake, but to the room. This man, he said, voice calm but edged with steel, stood for something when most of us were still learning how to crawl. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture wildly. He didn't pace. He simply was. Blake gave a bitter half laugh and glanced around, expecting allies, but found none. Only silence and stillness. What are you, a vet too? He scoffed. Logan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached up and slowly pulled down the zipper of his hoodie until it fell open. Beneath the gray cotton was a simple black tee, and resting against his chest, unmistakable, the gold and silver insignia of the United States Navy SEAL trident, gleaming like truth-made metal. Logan met Blake's eyes for the first time. Respect, he said. Just one word. That was all. And that word, from him, meant more than any raised voice ever could. The silence stretched again, but this time it was a stillness of reflection, not discomfort. A reverent pause. A recalibration of perception. From the check-in desk, a second gate agent, slightly older with silver hair and the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen things shift before, walked toward the line. She tapped her headset once and murmured into the mic. A moment later, a third agent approached Earl with measured steps. "Sir," she said gently, "would you allow us the honor of walking you to your gate? You're first aboard." Earl blinked. Once, twice, then nodded. A ripple moved through the line, the subtle shifting of posture as people stepped aside. Blake tried to speak again, lifting a finger as if to argue, but a TSA supervisor arrived behind him and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sir, you need to step out of line." "I didn't do anything." "Sir, now," Blake sputtered. Then, for the first time since his arrival, fell completely silent. Earl turned slowly, his cane clicking gently with each motion. His eyes found Logan's once more, and for a fleeting second, something passed between them. Something that needed no words. Gratitude, recognition, brotherhood across generations. Logan offered a nod, small, crisp, the nod of a warrior acknowledging another. Earl straightened. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't raise his chin. He simply stood taller than the weight of the years had previously allowed. And as he walked forward, past the gathered travelers, past the security cordons, toward the gate doors that opened just for him, the terminal remained hushed, not in shame anymore, but in honor. A hush rippled through the terminal like a warm wind sweeping through dry leaves. It wasn't silence born of fear. It was reverence, immediate and complete, the kind that doesn't need a script or a signal. Earl Whitmore blinked slowly, as though waking from a long and bitter sleep. His cane shifted slightly beneath his grip, steadied by instinct. His eyes lifted toward the face of the man now standing beside him. Logan Travers, tall and still, the United States Navy SEAL trident on his chest, catching a slant of light from the window. "Sir?" said a voice nearby, gentle, female. A flight attendant had come down from the gate. She knelt slightly so her face was level with Earl's. Her hands were out, not to touch him, but to guide his attention. We'd be honored to escort you to your seat. You board now. First." Earl didn't move at first. There was a pause, long enough for the crowd to breathe in the meaning of that moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Not out of confusion, but out of care. He looked over at Logan, who had stepped just a half pace back, still present, but letting the elder man carry the moment forward. The businessman, Blake Marston, had gone pale. Not out of shame yet, but from the sudden realization that the weight of the room had shifted against him. A uniformed TSA supervisor was speaking to him quietly, professionally. No handcuffs, no headlines. Just a firm escort away from the gate and into the corridor of his own consequence. No one clapped. Not at first. But as Earl took a step forward, his shoes softly tapping against the speckled tile, a quiet applause began near the back. A few hands, slow and steady. Then more. Not celebratory. Reverent. A boy stepped from the line, the same young man who had tried to defend Earl earlier. He placed a hand gently on Earl's shoulder as they passed, a wordless sign of gratitude. His eyes were wide, misted, fixed on something far older than himself. Earl walked with steadier posture than before. His legs did not grow younger, but they found rhythm again. A rhythm not of pride, but of belonging. For the first time in what felt like years, he wasn't being tolerated. He was being honored. An elderly woman placed her hand over her heart. A child in a red baseball cap saluted without being told. Near the coffee kiosk, a young mother wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. As he reached the gate, Earl paused. His breath caught briefly in his chest, not from exhaustion, but from memory. His hand went to his chest pocket, where a folded paper still rested from that morning. A letter he had written in case he did not get the chance to speak in person. It wasn't needed now, but it remained a piece of him, a connection to Bobby Donnell, to all the boys who hadn't come home. Logan stood behind him now, not as a shadow, but as a witness. As Earl turned to face the crowd one final time, his lips parted. No speech, no demand, just a breath that trembled into words. "Thank you," he said, and the room stilled again. The footage reached the internet before Earl's plane even left the ground. It started as a 30-second clip, a still frame of a hunched old man in uniform, then a rising voice, sharp and dismissive. The sound of one word, respect, cutting clean through the static of noise, followed by a long, unexpected silence. Within hours, that silence echoed across millions of screens. The airport issued a statement by morning. A spokesperson stood before the press with carefully chosen words and folded hands. She acknowledged the incident, named Earl Whitmore with quiet deference, and announced immediate revisions to the airport's boarding policies, specifically addressing the treatment of elderly veterans and passengers with visible service insignia. All staff, especially security and gate agents, would undergo sensitivity retraining. It wasn't just a headline. The video had tapped into something deeper, an ache long ignored. Veterans of forgotten wars, now in wheelchairs and walkers, were being seen again, listened to. There was something undeniably human in Earl's posture, his steadiness, and his refusal to raise his voice. The Transportation Security Administration followed suit, issuing internal guidelines on how to properly support veterans during travel. A section on visible symbols of service was included, encouraging agents to pause, to speak gently, to ask rather than assume. The man at the center of the storm, Blake Marston, remained unnamed in public releases, but airline sources quietly confirmed that his frequent flyer privileges had been revoked. He had been flagged for aggressive behavior toward vulnerable passengers. It wasn't prison, and it wasn't exile, but it was the beginning of something he couldn't ignore, something he'd have to sit with in silence for a while. And Earl? He didn't ask for attention. He never had. But when his connecting flight landed 2 days later, a representative from the Veterans Affairs Office was waiting at the terminal, not with fanfare, but with a handshake. The local news station was there too, though they kept their distance. Their segment didn't focus on the confrontation. Instead, it centered on a question. How many men like Earl walk among us every day, unacknowledged? By the week's end, Earl had received a handwritten letter from the governor's office, inviting him to speak at the state capitol for Veterans Honor Week. The invitation was soft-spoken and optional, but earnest. He accepted. At the dedication ceremony for Bobby Donnell's grandson, Earl was given the final word. He didn't speak long. He simply held up a folded photo of two young men in muddy fatigues and said, "I made a promise. I kept it." The final change came months later, when the airport unveiled a new plaque in Terminal B, a bronze engraving titled, "The Line That Should Not Be Crossed." It bore no names, just the image of an old soldier standing tall, and the single word that had turned everything: respect. The lake was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that carried weight, not emptiness, but meaning. Autumn leaves clung stubbornly to the branches, some loosing themselves gently with each ripple of wind. A pair of ducks coasted through the fog toward the far bank, where sunlight threatened to break through a gauzy veil of mist. Earl Whitmore sat on the bench just where the path curved to meet the water. He had been here before, often in fact, but never quite like this. He wore a dark wool coat, buttoned neatly. The same coat he wore to his wife's funeral and again at Bobby Donnell's grandson's ceremony. Folded in his lap was a photo, creased at the corners, dulled by time. Two young men in uniforms too big for their shoulders, grinning through dirt and exhaustion. Bobby and Earl. Somewhere in the background, a makeshift Christmas tree of spent shells and ration wrappers. He stared at it for a long time, thumb brushing gently over the edges. Then he spoke, not loudly, but like one half of an old conversation just waiting to be resumed. "They know you mattered now. We both did." His voice didn't tremble. It wasn't a plea. It was a closing of a circle. Beyond the water, the sun began to break through. The light caught the surface just right, and the lake responded in glimmering ripples, like a salute in silver. A child's laughter floated from the trail behind him. A father's quiet footsteps followed. And then nothing again, just wind in the branches and the faint creak of the bench as Earl leaned back. He closed his eyes, let the sunlight rest on his face. No trumpets, no applause, just the dignity of a quiet morning, a mission fulfilled, and a friend remembered. The flag on his coat collar stirred with the breeze, fluttering once before settling, and then, like the last page of a book, gently turned. Stillness. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this story brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.